the Mosasaurus had, I don't know what Kongst-teching should be, but is das overleafed that ever lived? This is how it must be for Scott to read English. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
It's a Q&A video again. As of this recording, we haven't released the May one, and we're going to catch up really fast.
Is it not May anymore?
It is not May.
Oh.
It's later than May, and our clothes are not going to change for the next few Q&A videos because we have special Q&A video recording outfits that we wear for these videos. So we're going to get started with the Q&As. Just for anybody who doesn't know what a Q&A video is, you ask questions. We've got answers for those questions. I know the concept of a Q&A is very esoteric. So the people who send us these questions are our patrons at Basilosaurus tier and higher on our Patreon. So when you're supporting us at that tier, you get access to this special Discord server where you can submit questions for our monthly Q&A videos. And by monthly, I mean they will eventually come out. And those videos are coming out now. So we're going to get right into the June one because we've waited long enough already. The answers are burning holes in our answer holding pockets. And I'm going to turn it over to the question monger, Dalton.
Thank you.
Thank you, question monger.
It's time to start mongering.
His question holding pockets.
Yes. Let me start mongering the questions.
Monger them.
And our first question comes to us from insert nickname, who asks, if you were able to go to any location to go fossil hunting that's not well sampled, where would you go? And I'll open that up to anyone because we have not no pre-prepared answers on this one.
That's true.
Wouldn't you like to know? I'm not telling you. I want a job.
So if this is just about what is not well sampled but theoretically preserves fossils, which is, I guess, is different from like where would you like there to be fossils from? That's how I'm interpreting it.
That's how I read it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, probably vast regions of like what's considered the greater Middle East that have not been thoroughly sampled. Like, you know, we know the potential there is going to be amazing, and when paleontological exploration there starts being done more in earnest, I'm sure there's going to be incredible discoveries all through that region from like the Mesozoic onward. So that's probably where I'd like to look. Well, there you go. Thank you, insert nickname.
Yes, thank you.
Antarctica, once it's scraped clean of the ice. It's a huge desert. No plants or buildings to worry about.
No,
Only
that's true.
Global human suffering.
We got to go in that little window between when the ice melts and when the sea level rises high enough to cover where the ice was.
Yeah.
I remember having a chat with Matt Lamana at SVP a while ago because he does field work in Antarctica, and I was just like, how is it there? And he's just like, wow, it is. Just conflicting emotions when we go down there because every single year there's new exposures, but every single year there's new exposures.
Indeed.
I'd love to go to Antarctica.
Me too. It is on my list of places I want to go and where I would like to dig. But yeah, so thank you, insert nickname. Our next question comes from Gojira, who has asked, what types of paleontological studies do you find the most underappreciated? Geometric morphometrics, phylogenetic analyses, etc. I'll begin by saying detailed osteologies are underappreciated because they take more time to do well than is often allowed by the current kind of calendar of like when you need to be publishing things in academia. And so they fall to the wayside in lieu of bright, shiny new method that I can do quickly. But they're foundational to the field. Also, something that I don't really see like ever, but I think would be useful is like actual locality specific faunal descriptions of not just like, here's everything we find in the Hell Creek, but like, here's all these sites we went to. Here's everything we found at this site. Here's how much we found of it. Here's how we've identified it to X, Y, and Z. Like, these would be incredibly tedious and probably pretty boring reads, but they'd be very useful.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to agree with Dalton that, yeah, detailed osteologies are something that don't happen as much when they do a lot of work goes into them, and they're just kind of not shrugged off, but I think people should do more of them.
I agree. I agree, but I'm not going to say this because two people have already said it. I think really, really detailed things that tie modern embryology into the fossil record, like really true integrative evo-devo studies, can be so important. And I think that despite evo-devo being a thriving field, there aren't a tremendous number of studies that are really tying, like saying, how can we interpret this thing in the fossil record based on developmental data or something? And when those papers come out, they're extremely powerful and really important for understanding of the record. So barring more osteologies of different specimens, that's probably my answer.
I mean, yeah, no, I agree with Dalton. Not only are they underappreciated, they're the most important part of the field. They are the primary data that everyone else gets to use. And as someone who's currently writing one, please like them more. They're very hard. They're a lot of work, man.
That's the thing, though. Everybody does like them.
No one's ever like, what a terrible osteology someone's made. But no one ever gets excited.
Oh, well, I've said that.
I know, I've also said that. I said that maybe 20 minutes ago, but...
Yeah. But right, I've never heard anybody say they're not valuable and you shouldn't do them. It's just, I think the difficulty of the undertaking means that people don't.
Well figured, too.
Yeah, well, and that's another important thing, is there's a lot of poorly figured osteologies that I think, to some degree, when they're really poorly figured, they might as well not exist. It's also like, I mean, maybe we should say this for our audience before we move on, or unless Scott has one that he wants to add too.
Nah, I'm not enough in the research side to really have an opinion on this.
Fair point. I want to emphasize to our readers, an osteology is not just you writing what the bones look like. Like when we say a description, a good osteology engages with the prior literature and is also to some degree an interpretation of other specimens in reference to the one you are responding to. Like, I always kind of say to aspiring students, the difference between a good paper and a bad paper is a bad paper is usually one that doesn't relate to the rest of the field. Like I could just write an anatomical description, a fairly basic one of like almost any fossil. Unless you know enough about the literature, you're not going to be able to add enough information or make meaningful comparisons or draw meaningful conclusions in a way that's actually like responding to prior work versus you just saying this fossil looks like this. And I would say that if you're just saying this fossil looks like this, that's not really the kind of osteology we're talking about.
Comparative. You got to compare, bro.
You do.
Indeed, you must. So thank you, Gojira, for that question.
Indeed.
This next one is more in Scott's alley. And so Scott will ask you to start. But Dinodom has asked, what is the worst thing you have seen in a lab, be it old tools, bad fossil prep, or awful building design?
So this one's a little bit of a maybe left field answer. The worst things that I've seen in a prep lab are not the cause of bad prep or negligence or anything like that. They've been the direct consequence of lack of funding. Fossil prep is a very particular subdiscipline. It requires a lot of very specialized tools, a lot of very specialized safety things, and those different specialized tools and equipment are incredibly particular for whatever you are working on and are not cheap. And so basically the fossil prep labs that I have seen in my career have either been like, this is a lovely space, you guys are doing great, or you guys are doing the best with what you have. It's definitely not anything that is on the particular preparators. I mean, fossil prep is an incredibly hard discipline to get into. So generally the people who are in it to the point where they are running a lab know how to do it pretty dang well. And it's just the external limiting factors that are that are bottlenecking whatever facility they are working at from being the absolute best of what I imagine, what all of us imagine in our head our ideal fossil prep lab would look like.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is another like consequence of lack of funding, like Scott said, where it was actually in a collection space and not in a lab. That there were like just open sewer grates in the floor in this basement space. Very cool. Again, like the real problem is that the institution has not been able to relocate these collections to a space that actually makes more sense and isn't as the way it is. But again, it's no knock on the people working there. Like, it's just, what are you going to do? Like, what can you do in that position? Yeah, so that kind of sucks. Luckily, they're the only thing they can do, which they did do, was offer me a mask so that it didn't smell as bad. But yeah.
Yeah, another excellent question.
Indeed.
And our
Thanks,
next
Dom.
excellent question comes from Noah Riccio, who asks, discounting the Bone Wars, what story in the field of paleontology do you think would be most interesting to see portrayed in a serialized TV/streaming series? I have written an answer, and interesting might be stretching the words. There would almost certainly have to be some manufactured drama. But I think there's probably some stuff to be done in like a period piece of very, very early paleontology in England. And things like Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins making the Crystal Palace dinosaurs and his attempt to do so in America that did not come to fruition. I think a good portrayal of Richard Owen would be an interesting character for an accomplished actor to do. I think there's probably something interesting to be done in that kind of period of time. Not like one discrete story necessarily, but there are a lot of events occurring. So
give him a little depth. Let him be a person and not like the Darwin enemy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, Owen's a fascinating figure. I will not speak on this because we need to keep a clip through this video, but I did write a college essay about him at one point. It was an early thing I wrote where I really tried to read as much as I could about his life and why he might have become the person that he did. And I think he's interesting. I think he would be a very, very interesting character.
I'm not sure if this would make for that good of a maybe even I'll rephrase that. I'm taking this answer as more of a media, a screen media adaptation. I think, especially after reading up on Zofia Kilen-Jaworowska's story, I talked about in the Gallimimus episode. Oh my God, I want to see a biopic about her. She was so cool. And that would be a really, really awesome. I guess it could work as a miniseries, like having bits during Nazi occupation and the early years and stuff, and then eventually going into establishing Polish paleontology and the relationships with Mongolia and the adventures from there. Yeah, no, I could see that as multiple little stories over. Yeah, I'm bringing back around to, I think this would make a good show.
It's not strictly paleo, but I think something about the early days of the AMNH would be interesting because you'd get interactions between Roosevelt and Akeley and Osborne and Barnum Brand, all these weirdos doing a very particular thing. And I think amongst the gaggle of them, there are plenty of stories that tie back to paleo over and over and over. That would be interesting. And then just the story of the museum itself is interesting and long, and there's a whole bunch that happened. It moved around a bunch of times. There's all the additions and stuff. There's plenty of drama with people involved. And it would allow for some of those things to be explored. I'm thinking, Osborne's horrible things. I think it'd be interesting to put a light on that and what did it actually do to the public and how does it relate to paleo and natural history and museums and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I definitely think an anthology series that's each episode focusing on a different character in both senses of the word of the AMNH's past. And basically almost have it be like an adaptation, air quotes, because it'd just be a documentary like Dinosaurs in the Attic.
I could see that. I think of strictly paleo. If it had to be historical, I would like to see something about Barnum Brown. I think.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a spy, like during World War II also, and apparently had a career in corporate espionage afterward. Very, very interesting man.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, just also much more recent than a lot of people think. Like he died in, I think, the 70s.
Oh wow. Jeez.
Yeah, like he died in 63. Okay, so not quite as late as I thought, but I don't know. He was around for a good chunk of time. He's not really only active during those like 1920s, 19 teens era where a lot of the discoveries were made. He was around for a long time. But my answer to this is like, I don't even want it to be a historical show because I think I think it's hard, but not impossible to make a narrative about an important scientific breakthrough. But I think that when it's like paleontology, it's harder to show what the stakes would have been versus like a movie like Oppenheimer doesn't need to work that hard to convince you that what's happening is going to be fairly significant.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see a fictional story. I think it could be perfectly based on a lot of stuff that's happened in real paleontology, but I also think it would be fine to like play up the various aspects of things that happen in academia, play up the political kind of infighting and, the constantly changing networks of who's working together and who's allowed access to specimens. You could do a lot to show people kind of a level down or a level up from what's real that's played up, but is still kind of compelling and interesting.
Succession, but academia.
Sure. Yeah. No, something like that. But I mean, there is a degree to which all of this stuff happens. It's just like, the stakes are not usually life or death, but there's a lot of the same kinds of dynamics that makes most prestige cable TV interesting. I think it would be interesting to have one that's unshackled from being a historical thing, and you can just have somebody be a real piece of
My answer to this is I want a 12-episode miniseries about the 1920 AMNH Mongolian expedition.
Just waiting for someone to say Andrews.
That is done basically with the same, even though it's a movie, the kind of energy, pace, and like point of view of There Will Be Blood. We're like,
yes,
all of them are like psychotic lunatics.
There will be bones.
Osborne is like a frothing racist the whole time. It's like elevate it. Just you probably wouldn't need to. And just like
with Osborne, I don't think you need to.
No,
he's
that's not elevated.
Just like extend the feverish arm of like the 20s American Empire into Mongolia and be like, and then first and last episode it ties back to like modern, the American Museum and the modern, and it's like, how'd all this stuff get here? It's like, why do we know what Velociraptors? Why do we know what Velociraptor is? And then the last episode is like you cut to like someone looking at the Velociraptor skull and like, now how did we find this? And there's just Henry Fairfield Osborne scribbling in journal. It's like, not from Africa, from Asia.
I imagine him like holding his pencil like this too, like he's full like kindergartner with a crayon grip on it. Like
Roy Chapman Andrews is like basically a transatlantic radio playman, and he just caves in some guy's head with like the butt of his gun. Like, isn't that something? Just something kind of almost hateful, something that like people would watch and be like, is this a good field? Is this a good thing for people to do? Something that I think would upset most people, but entertain me. That's it.
Alex setting out here to make the first anti-paleontology TV
Propaganda.
show. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have a budget to make a TV show. What are you doing? I'm going to make the come and see of paleontology.
I think the difficulty of any such show, though, would be like, you do have to make it about the people more than the science, which I think also potentially makes paleontologists perhaps the worst judge of what this show should be.
Yeah.
Because it would, I mean, like I bring up Oppenheimer a lot because I think it's one of the only movies I've seen that's like about a science breakthrough to do it successfully. And there's obviously two things going for it. One is it's potentially the most significant thing that ever happened in the history of humanity after like learning to grow seeds. Right. Yeah. We learned to make fire. We learned to plant things, and then we learned to blow things up with the power of the atom.
Bigger fire.
But also it deals almost nothing with the actual science that the people were doing. It's about the people. And I think it was obviously a very popular and successful movie. And I think that you'd have to have something of that approach where it is like you have to show them hunting for fossils, but you can almost not ever indulge in telling us about what they're actually doing with them.
No. Yeah, but that was a fun question. I like that.
That is a fun question.
Our next one comes to us from RyanWantsToDie, who just asks, what on God's green repugnant earth is going on with ichthyosaur flippers? They're moving to water. You know, they go like this, and then they can swim around. No, they're weird, but I don't know. I actually don't think they're that weird.
They're bad. Like they're bad to look at. What they're doing is biologically very interesting. They look like a cobblestone road or a corn cob. And the reason for that is they do a thing called hyperphalangy. Tetrapod limbs are kind of built in a very predictable pattern of one bone, two bone, lots of bones. And within the digits, if you bend your hands, you can see how many phalanges you have. Those are the finger bones. And every single person will have, usually, there are obviously exceptions, the same. Like the idea is that animals tend to have the same number of finger bones. And among reptiles, broadly, the number is pretty conserved, usually, unless they do something weird with their hands. Or like taking like lizards as an example. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's like 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2 again, or something like that. And hyperphalangy is when you get any deviation from that by tacking on more finger bones, which, you know, technically creates more joints, but usually you see this in aquatic animals because they're tacking on a bunch of fingers to make their hands longer, make their digits longer, and that's just the strategy for making the actual hand part of the limb longer. Because if you're making this longer or this longer, you're not actually increasing the surface area of the flipper itself. And so that's why you see lengthening of the fingers instead of lengthening of the other bones. You actually see shortening of the other bones in, I think, all secondarily aquatic tetrapods. So ichthyosaurs are doing two things. They're doing hyperphalangy, which is tacking on all those little bones, which is why it looks like a cobblestone road. But the worst thing that they're doing sometimes is adding more fingers. So something that is extremely conserved among tetrapods generally, like as soon as, or I guess amniotes, I'll say, as soon as we make the jump to land, there's this hard lock-in at a certain point. I don't know exactly when, because you'll find some weirdos early on of 5 digits. Like every amniote almost has 5 digits. Sometimes they lose them. Like that's normal. So like you see that in birds, you see it in horses. I'm not going to do because it's their middle finger. But you see a reduction in digits. But what you don't normally see is an increase. You'll see it in some of the really early stuff. It's like Ichthyosaurus or Acanthostega that has 8.
I think it's both. And honestly, Amelia, I do think that you were right in the first place. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it is just a tetrapod thing, and it's the earliest ones that they just had more, and then everything else has lost them. Yeah.
So like really early on with those early tetrapod amphibian-like things, you'll see some variation in the number. With some of them like 8, some of them I think have 12, but they still look like a little hand, basically. Ichthyosaurs are, to my knowledge, the only groups post the 5-finger lock-in to actually gain digits. Everybody else, like after that point, I don't know exactly when or where it happens, but after a certain point, all tetrapods have 5 digits, unless they lose them. Ichthyosaurs start to gain them back. I think some of them have 7 or 8. But
some have up to 10 or more.
It's disgusting. You shouldn't do that. And that's why they look like the way they do. And the little finger bones, this is another thing that happens convergently in secondarily marine animals, is that the finger bones go from being kind of long and spindly, which, like, you know, our fingers aren't super good examples of this, but if you look at a human hand skeleton next to an ichthyosaur skeleton, you'll see immediately that their finger bones are round. Their phalanges are round. And that's because they're all packing really tightly together, and they're even packing in more fingers. Again, I don't really know why. But it is kind of cool. And if you want to look into the actual like genetic and developmental underpinnings of this, thankfully, like there's a lot of research into how this happens and what exactly is going on with how embryo hands develop and what actually controls how many fingers we have. That's been a point of interest for a while because, like I said, it's such a hard lock-in at 5. People want to understand what causes deviations from that. So if you're interested, you can dig into the Evo Devo literature and find all kinds of fun experiments that do crazy things with limb development. So that's the real answer to this question. But of course, the other answer is it's horrible. Horrible as in different and not actually literally bad.
I mean, I'll be brave. It's literally bad. They shouldn't do it.
Oh, sure.
It's morally bad. It's physically, it keeps happening.
It's physically and mentally bad.
Yeah, plug for our merch. Hey, we have new designs. If you also want to wear something that is physically and mentally bad and show off that you have too many finger bones, then get this pin and put it on something that you own, and everyone will know this now.
It's a sticker.
It's a sticker. It's not a pin. Because I was going to say t-shirt because in my mind it's a t-shirt, but
it may eventually be a t-shirt.
Eventually, yes.
And with that segue, we can move on to our next question, which comes to us from the man with no name, who asks, what's everyone's favorite novel and why? Which is a tricky question. And Scott, you had your answer written down first, but because I typed mine in above you, I'm going to start.
Please do.
Which is, it's tricky to say, like, mostly because I've read a lot of novels in my time, but I have not read a lot of novels in the past, like, 5 years, because just my time to read for leisure is pretty much non-existent. It basically only happens when I travel, and frankly, it's been restricted to mostly Star Wars books, which is juvenile and depressing, but it brings me joy. But my favorite novel is not a Star Wars novel. What comes to mind immediately is either The Name of the Wind or Dune.
The Name of the Wind is so good.
Yeah, The Name of the Wind is a beautiful book by Patrick Rothfuss. It's part of a trilogy that remains unfinished, and
it will always be.
But it's a kind of higher-ish fantasy book with a really interesting magic system. But beyond like that kind of nerd aspect of it, it's just really beautifully written. The prose is just like, when I read it, I was like, oh wow, I kind of didn't realize prose could be like this. I'm not the most well-read person, sue me, but it's a beautiful book. Highly recommend it. And Dune is an excellent book. It's if you've seen the movies, read the book, and you'll understand why it's so hard to adapt into a movie, because it's all internal dialogue. And it's just like some of the wackiest, craziest stuff. It's like incredibly foundational for modern science fiction, both modern science fiction like in books and also media. If you like Star Wars, you should read Dune, because there is some foundational things that tie into very clear influences on George Lucas when he was writing Star Wars. It's often said, and it is true to an extent, that it's basically just Kurosawa and oh god, what's the guy? Who's the guy? Flash Gordon. But there's a lot of Dune in Star Wars as well, and it's just a lot of really interesting ideas presented in bonkers ways with just some of the craziest terminology. Like, I don't know if they make copies without a glossary, but don't get a copy without a glossary.
The glossary is like 60 pages long or something too, right? It's a lot of the book.
It's required reading.
A lot of the book is, this is how you read the book.
There are several appendices, all of which I enjoy tremendously. But if you have not read Dune, I highly recommend it. It's a great book.
I think its prose kind of suck, but it's a good book.
I don't think its prose is like outstanding, but it's kind of crazy.
I also just want to echo one of Dalton's points there for Name of the Wind. I'll also say that Name of the Wind is one of the only books that I've read where there's a recurring side character who shows up periodically who it's the only time I've read a book where I genuinely feel like that other person is in their own story and just so happens like they are the main character of a novel that I am not reading and just so happens to be dipping in and out of the story where they intersect. It's great. It's the most like lifelike I've felt that fantasy characters are. I need to reread those books, man. They're so long though. The audiobook of the second one is 47 hours or something like that. It's bonkers. But so I have two answers here. I'll say what my favorite novel is, and then what my favorite book is at the moment. My favorite novel, Song of Achilles. I loved that book. It was so gorgeously written, and like just a beautiful, beautiful tragedy. The prose is like almost unparalleled. And this, like, I grew up being a big fan of mythology and Greek mythology and stuff. And hearing a story that I've heard several times before, I've read the Iliad, being told in this framing was phenomenal. It was. It's like discovering a cover version of a song that you love, and it's even better than you remember. It's so good. I love that book very deeply. But my favorite book overall, and it's not a novel because it's super short, is This Is How You Lose the Time War. Oh my God, that book is so good. It's like 200 pages or less. Like the audiobook's like 4 hours, and it's like the setup is really weird and sci-fi and esoteric and stuff of these two women on opposite sides of an all history of like an alternate future, all history spanning war that is fought through different timelines, end up like leaving notes for each other, gloating about their conflict and victories and stuff, and then eventually falling in love throughout that. And it is the most beautiful thing I have ever read. I remember I put it on once to do some like vacuuming and stuff around my house. And I just remember just after like a half an hour, I was just laying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, completely immobile until the book was over. It was so good. I really need to reread that one.
My favorite book, or I think the best book I've read recently. There's one I'm reading right now, which is North Woods, which takes place.
I've heard of that. It's on my list.
It's great. Yes, I bought it while I was up vacationing in rural New England. And as it would turn out, it takes place in rural New England, and it's one of those books where the shtick is that it's. I shouldn't say the shtick. The conceit of the novel is that it's about a single like cabin through time from like the 1600s onward, and the various people and intersecting stories that that kind of live in that cabin or in the land that it's later built on, and just what their stories are. It starts with just like descriptions of the woods and everything. It's very beautiful, but I haven't finished it yet, so I shouldn't speak on it too much. I think my favorite novel of all time is a novel called Us Conductors that was released in 2014. It is not about trains, before you all make the joke.
I was going to say it.
I know you weren't. It is an amazing novel. The prose is some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever read. It has a rhythm and a music and a beauty to it that I find absolutely haunting. And it is about Leon Theremin, the man who invented the theremin.
Leon Theremin of theremin fame.
Of theremin fame. And the story of his life growing up in Russia, the Soviet Revolution, and then becoming very famous globally as a theremin musician, and later living in New York City, falling in love. It is just, the prose is beautiful, heartbreaking, devastating, just magical. It's one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had reading a book.
What was it called again?
Us Conductors. And I love it.
Add that to Libby right now.
I highly recommend that everybody read it. It won a bunch of awards, and it well should have. It's really, really striking.
This one's hard just because, like, I mean, kind of as Dalton said, I haven't been able to read a lot for fun in recent years, so there's nothing like immediately jumping to me. Like I think like there's a couple answers. Like obviously, like in terms of recent things I've read. Sorry, somebody's sneezing.
Bless you.
Recent things, it's absolutely Dune, which I didn't read until just a couple of years ago. But for all the reasons Dalton said, like, it took a while for me. I remember at first I was like, okay, this kind of sucks. And then it's like 100 pages in, things start to happen and they don't stop. And it just like accelerates. It's great. And then obviously just the whole like integration of like appendices in the glossary and just like, I don't know. I think it's incredible. A series that I always come back to, even though I've probably outgrown it by now, is the Inheritance Cycle, the Aragon series. Like I find myself rereading that once every couple of years and just picking up on new details because it's so long that there's so much to pick up on. And I also just think the circumstances in which it was written, where like the first one was written by the author at 16, all the way to the last one where he was like, I don't know, the last one was like what, 10 years after the first one. Like you can really track his progression as a writer through the series, which I think is also interesting. Like now that it's not even about the story itself, but it is because it's reflected in the themes and stuff kind of maturing as they go. And then from high school and college. In high school, I remember really liking 1984, but I have not read it since. But I just remember it was one of the first like school assignment books that I thought was actually interesting to think about and to deal with. And then the other one was more recent in terms of having an effect was Handmaid's Tale. Absolutely. It's a kind of book that like I never want to read it again, but that's because it was really good. So yeah.
Good news. If you like 1984, the way things are heading politically should be
We're
great.
living in it. No,
Well, The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah.
I was going to say Handmaid's Tale.
Reading of 1984.
Actually, Alex, I've got a deep shame for you.
Have you not read it?
I've not read it because in my high school, we were all supposed to read it, like for one of our literature units. But my English teacher had an alternative curriculum she wanted us to read. So I wound up reading The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which is one of the worst books it's apparently wonderful, but it's the kind of book that I think it's a book that's more written for like academics who study English literature than anything. Like I can see why a lot of people, especially people who study English lit, think it's great and transgressive and very interesting. I have never hated a book more in my life reading it than that book. And so I just never actually wound up reading 1984 because I was like, whatever. I think I get the gist, although I've always meant to.
Fair enough.
But yes.
I thought you were going to say, if you like 1984, wait till you hear about 1985.
I kind of thought you were going that way too.
Okay. I have to answer this question.
Mm-hmm.
You do.
The novel is a mass media trash. It's garbage for the masses. It is to smooth their brains over. We've forgotten how to appreciate the 1,000-page travelogue or 200,000 word epic poem. We must return. We wrote good old Don Quixote, and they've never been as good since. No.
How the hell did you just pronounce that?
Quixote, you mean?
Is it Quixote? I don't know. I don't know.
Don of Quixote fame?
Yeah.
Quixote. Quixote. Keep that. That's a good bit. No, I love novels.
I'm going to sing the virtues of a book that I can't pronounce. Let's go.
Oh, God. I honestly don't love it, but whatever. It's all right. I get it. I get why it's important. No, I have a lot of books. I love reading books. I enjoy novels, but I don't read a lot of them. I mostly read short stories, usually collections of short stories, usually spooky ones. But if I had to pick novels that I've read recently that have made quite an impact on me, I'll start with one I haven't finished, which is Carl Knausgaard's. He's got like 6. I got to like the second one. He's basically this guy who wrote his entire life and like all the horrible details of his family, and it's named Mein Kampf, which got a lot of press when it came out because it means what the other one means, but it's not like that. It's just a guy who wrote about like every detail of his life growing up. It's like it's like living behind someone. It's kind of cool. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't get through all. It's like 3,500 pages. But I was very impressed.
Oh God.
Blood Meridian I also read recently, and that was great. Possibly one.
Did you only read that recently?
Yeah, like last year.
Oh
I'm
my
actually
God!
kind of surprised. You've talked about it enough that I thought this was a lingering aspect of your personality.
I've been 2/3 of the way through Blood Meridian for almost 3 years now.
Okay,
this is how I spent a long time on Blood Meridian.
Yeah.
I would be like, oh, life sure is hard right now.
Over like I think a few trips back. No, Blood Meridian's fantastic. Moby Dick, possibly one of the best novels ever written.
I read that I read that way too early. I was in like middle school or something, and it was like actual torture for me.
Oh, it's good. But I think probably in terms of like the novel, this is I think my favorite novel that I've ever read is still House of Leaves, and I reread it a lot because it's like it's a little like it's like, oh, House of Leaves, that's your favorite book? How thoughtful. You must think you're good at books. No, it's good. I promise it's really good.
I mean, he does in fact think he's good at books.
Listen to the bit that he introduced this with,
where I forgot how to say the name of the first novel, the most important novel ever. I think I'm good at books. That's the joke. Yeah, no, House of Leaves, I think, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is still my favorite. Because it's weird. And it's about an asshole. And I like things that are about people that are very hard to root for.
You identify with that?
It's a book about four assholes. It's a book about an asshole who makes a movie. The blind asshole who finds his movie, and that asshole's like even worse sort of friend who finds that guy murdered. Good stuff.
Was that 3 assholes or 4?
Oh, sorry. The wife's also kind of sucks in the movie making group. And then there's a 5th asshole who's this guy that gets hired by the guy who's making the movie who goes insane inside the house.
I do really want to read that book.
And you can't audio it. Literally, it's against the disabled because you can't like.
No, it is genuinely. I haven't wanted to read a book more in my life, but I know that it is going to be one of the most difficult like entertainment things that I do.
It doesn't work as an audiobook.
No, I know it doesn't. Like I know what about it is interesting to the point where it doesn't like translate to that medium, but it just pisses me off because I'm like, I want to, but it'll take me a year and a half to read it, and I'll forget what happened at the beginning by the time I'm done with it.
That's fair. It took me a while. My first read through took me months.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. I like these questions. I like questions about these things.
Yeah, that was a good question. So thank you very much. Mayday asks our next question, which is, how did Jose Bonaparte end up naming such a huge portion of Argentina's dinosaurs? Well, I wrote down an answer, and not meaning to be glib, but mostly it helps to be the founder of your field locally, which is, I mean, I think a big part of it is that Jose was one of the first, like, really prominent Argentinian paleontologists who really was, like, doing a lot of work in Argentina. And so by virtue of kind of being one of the main founding figures there, wound up naming a ton of fossils.
Yeah.
I am ignorant of a lot of the history of Argentinian paleontology, so I'm sure there is nuance that I'm overlooking with that, which is why I was kind of like, this is a very simple answer. But I can't say much more.
I mean, I think that's that is, to my understanding, like Jose Bonaparte has kind of that like foundational presence there, the way that like C.C. Young does in China, that like people like Owen and Mantell have in Britain, and like Marsh and Cope and Leidy have in the US, where just, yeah, right, being the main person driving the development of a field in your country will mean you wind up naming a lot of things.
All right, well, let's move on then. Our next question is from King Zasshu, who asks, I want the crew's thoughts on Andrew Chops, and Smilonemes from Jurassic World Alive as designs. And the designs are in the Discord if you haven't seen them. I think they're hideous. I don't like them. And I also had to look up what they were.
Me too.
And so I will share that now. Which is, well, I didn't look up Smilonemes, but I'm assuming it's Smilodon and Stupendomes or some other turtle.
It's Smilodon and another turtle thing. Of the two, that one's the most like visually pleasing. It looks like a Star Wars character thing. But like the other one is a demon from hell made exclusively out of scabs, and it made me violently
ill. Really, so it's Androtops is a hybrid of Arctops, which is a therapsid, a real therapsid, and then another hybrid, Andrewtodon, which itself is a hybrid of Andrewsarchus and Glyptodon, and it just kind of looks like it has a disease.
It really does. It looks like this is the platonic ideal of a chupacabra. It's bad. It's bad, y'all.
Yeah, go. Sorry, James.
Oh, I was just gonna say I am looking right now in the Discord, and I don't think I'm gonna like it.
I looked. I'll be very quick. I don't like these. I don't like that. I was asked to look at them. I don't think this game should exist. It looks like shit. Everything I see from it looks ugly. Yeah, that's what I got.
I will say this in like Scott, I prefer Smilonemes. That looks like actually like some creature design thought was put into it, to the point where like I could see this being like a small creature in like one of the PlayStation 2 Monster Hunter games.
Yeah,
and people would love it.
Yeah.
But now it's in a mobile game and it's a hybrid of a cat and a turtle, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I dislike.
It's Carbonomes, by the way, is the turtle.
Okay.
Well, actually, no. This one's a hybrid too, a double hybrid too. It's Smylocephalosaurus, which points to guess what that one's made out of, and Carbonomes.
So I'll say, having actually played the game, I haven't recently because I had no time, but like I played it solidly from when it came out for a couple of years. It was infinitely more fun to me than Pokemon Go, which was at the time still like underdeveloped. I'm told it's improved, but whatever. Like this one came out of the gates with like a much better battle mechanic and stuff. And of these two, the first one is hideous, ugly as sin. Hated battling against it. But the Smilodon one, I think, because it was like the terminal form of one of the other ones that I like to use, and it did actually kick ass. It's ugly. Like I hate. Some of the designs are actually really good in that game. Like some of the weird hybrids, they actually do a good job and put a lot of effort into them. But at a certain point, they do begin to look like what they are, which is inbred. And both of these look that way. But I will prefer the second one, if only because that was one of my main critters when I did play the game actively.
I really like that. I looked up what Smylocephalosaurus looks like, and it's just Smilodon with a helmet. It's in our Facebook chat.
I do kind of like that. He's ready to work. He's got his heart out on OSHA approved.
Indeed.
But that was a fun question, making us look at horrible things. This next question doesn't make us look at anything except inside our minds. And this comes from Paleo AK92, who asks, I'm intending to pursue my PhD in paleontology or evolutionary biology within the next 2 years, but I'm split on the decision. I love both, and I'd hoped there'd be a lot of crossover between them, but I figured you'd have more insight. And there is some crosstalk. To my mind, it really depends on the questions and methods you're interested in, more so than anything. And that I will just say that if you go down the evolutionary biology path, expect it to probably be much more strongly molecular. And you'll be dealing with molecular data methods, answering questions about extant groups or their very recent history. Maybe not necessarily. But if you're more interested in things like anatomy, you might have more luck going down the route of paleontology. That's just my 2 cents.
I think you're spot on with that, Dalton. It's just kind of the way it is.
I wasn't shaking my head because I disagreed. I opened the messenger and saw the smiling Emmys again.
Ah, well, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, and I'll agree that and I'll add it's ultimately there are not many places where you can get a PhD in paleo specifically anyway, and so it winds up being a paleo focused degree in either some geology or some biology. So for example, my degree is comparative biology, or it will be comparative biology. But that's not the case everywhere. Paleo, because it kind of deals with both geo and bio, tends to get put in different departments at differing institutions. And usually you're not going to have the opportunity to actually say, my PhD is in paleontology. It'll be a PhD in geology or in biology but your research, it still doesn't change the research. And the secret here is ultimately the name of the degree doesn't matter. What does matter is the experience that you gain with it and how you apply that to your CV. Because when it comes time to apply to jobs, some of them will say a PhD in biology or PhD in geology required, but as a paleontologist, again, that doesn't normally happen. So, but they see that in your CV and the types of experience you have and the types of publications that you're putting out. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but like they said, focus more on what kinds of questions do you want to answer, what kind of data do you want to work with, what kind of people do you want to work with, and let that guide where you wind up. So and that's ultimately why I wound up at the AMNH, is because first I'm much more interested in biological questions, but also because this program offers a lot of opportunity to do comparison with extant stuff, because it's a natural history museum. We have a lot of dead lizards from the modern day that I can, incorporate into my questions or into my research, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So not a clear cut answer. It does just kind of depend, but I guess my takeaway, unless these guys disagree, would just be don't focus so much on the actual name of the degree, but what courses will you be taking, what lab will you be in, and what kind of work do they do, and what aspects of that interest you.
I agree. I mean, you do have to think that functionally your PhD will be in it'll be in what the field is that you worked in, on a functional level. I've never, except on my CV and on official documents, I've never said that my PhD is in comparative biology. I always say that I have a PhD in paleontology because that's the work that I did. And that's the work of the lab that I do. In the same way that I think some of my friends there would describe it as a PhD in herpetology or anthropology or something, depending on what they work on. It's ultimately, this is a very personal decision. It's hard to say. If your background, and I think, we've chatted a little bit, and I know that your background is very strongly quantitative. That skill set will probably be more broadly applicable in evolutionary bio with molecular data, just because we generally lack anything near what you would consider a sufficient sample size for doing paleo things. Unless you're an invertebrate paleontologist, anything vertebrate, the maximum sample size you'll have is dozens. Maybe 100 for some really, really, really astonishingly preserved things. But the main thing is, if you're going to be, if you're targeting an institution, look at what the researchers at that institution who are kind of within your field of interest do and what kinds of questions you could pursue in those labs. And that may make the decision for you, especially if geography is a consideration. With doing a PhD, you often do need to consider how far you're willing to move from home. I wound up being very close to where I grew up for my PhD, so I could visit home a lot. Other people are a lot further. But my bar was kind of I interviewed at University of Washington. Doing the flight back to where I grew up from there, I kind of felt, I don't really want to be this far from my family if I want to go back for the holidays or something, a 6-hour transcontinental flight. And so, luckily around the area that I was, there were a bunch of great paleontology labs. So if you're targeting particular schools or a particular area, and that's a really critical thing for you, that's very understandable, but that might also help you make your decision. And okay, if there's not a if you would want to do dinosaur paleontology and the schools you're able to look at don't do dinosaur paleo, that's kind of your decision. The one thing I would heavily advise is don't try to go to a program or a lab with the expectation that you're going to do something fundamentally different from what's done there. You want to be a part of their research program, and you're going to carry it forward, and you might take things in a slightly new direction. But, I wouldn't have applied to work with Mark Norell at the AMNH and say, like, I really want to do, like, early tetrapod evolution. Like, that's not the skill set of the lab. The lab focused on crocodilians and lizards and dinosaurs, most famously. And so it would be not really wise, I would say, to go to, like, a lab with somebody who might be in the field that's like doing evolutionary bio on lizards in the Caribbean, like the kind of work that Jonathan Losos pioneered, and saying, okay, I want to work with you, but I want to do all of my work on dinosaurs from the Hell Creek Formation, just because it means your advisor won't really be equipped to advise you well on that stuff. And that can be a problem. And so if geography is a consideration or a heavy consideration, you might want to look at all of the labs that would be available for you to work in and start to target your decision ultimately based on that.
No, I think we should move on.
I agree.
Unless, Scott, did you have anything to add?
Nah.
Then let's move on to Danocheirus, who asks for the monthly Q&A, what specimen would each of you sum up as disgusting or heinous, even in terms of pathology or just existing as an animal at one point? Every time I see Big Al's foot, my toes start itching for some reason. Nothing like really strongly came to mind immediately. So I'm going to throw out Jonkeria. I think looks kind of sick and just wrong. It's not. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, it's not pathological. But it's just got a really long, weird face. And I think its name is appropriate. I don't know what its name means, but I do look at that thing and I'm like, yeah, that's a Jonkeria. It's Jonkin. But it's a gross animal.
Would you say it's joncular?
It is, yes.
Oh, very much so. For me, all Rhynchosaurus. All of them. They're all bad. Some of them are less bad than others. Some things like Hyperadapedon are probably like one of the ugliest animals I've seen in my entire life. And then also knowing that they're like physiologically bad too. That I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it on the channel before. That big, like, beak, buck teeth thing. Not a beak, not buck teeth. That's the premaxilla. They just grind bone on bone, and it's awful. I hate that so much. Very, 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 very bad animals that are just gross. Hyperadapedon's head is wider than it is long. Like, it's
every fossil is a splendid mystery, and I don't think any of them are gross. Even the ones with horrible pathologies are evidence of deep past. I also nothing came to mind, so I don't have a real answer.
Oh, wait. I just thought, James, what was that ugly group of mammals that you worked on?
Oh, Teniodonts. Yeah.
Yeah, Teniodonts are also heinous. I remember
that was going to be my answer, but yeah.
Oh, well, dovetail into yours then.
It's okay. Well, yeah, my answer is Teniodonts. They were my first publication, and they all look like they were beaten with an ugly stick. They're just so bad. I hate them all. I mean, I'm very grateful for them existing, but they are near the bottom of animals I would want to see from the past.
How do you spell that again?
Taeniodon. Yeah, Todontid, right.
I remember there was one of them in the lab in Michigan. I forget exactly which one it was, but had a skull of it, and I looked it up to see what it looked like, and it gave the most cursed ass reconstruction I've ever seen in my entire life.
They're very bad, and they should all be destroyed.
Well, they were.
Well, yeah, you know what? Thank God.
So I'm actually going to stick to the spirit of the question. And there is an individual specimen. There's technically two, but one of them is not published. The other one, the one that I'm going to talk about, I don't think is published, but it is on display talking about how horrible it is. They're at the Natural History Museum in Maastricht. There is a mosasaur skeleton that is mounted. I think the mount is all fake, but some of the real bones from that animal are scattered around the exhibit next to it. And one of those bones is its quadrate, its ear bone, basically. And next to the quadrate is a plastic like measuring cup with stuff in it. So the quadrate, which I realized like fully when I was there a couple years ago to actually like study it, and so they took it out of the case for me. Being able to hold it, I was like, oh, I see how horrible this is. Basically, this thing had an infection of some kind to the point where the entire bottom, like half of the quadrate, like it looks normal from the front, but from behind, it's hollowed out. And what the cup is a model of about a liter or 2 liters. It's a lot. I'd say it's like 1.5 liters, maybe, somewhere in that zone. I don't think it's 2 liters. It's a lot, is my point. There's no nice way to put this, and it took me reading the sign a couple of times because like I don't speak Dutch, but it's close enough to German that I can kind of make it out, and I had to pull out my translator because I'm like I don't want to believe what this is saying. The cup is a model, and the stuff within it is a model of how much pus would have been contained within the abscess that caused that hollowing out of the bone. It's like 1 liter or 1.5 liters of pus, and so the cup is like this white, gross shit. It's even got like blood in it. It's so nasty, and that's
so cool.
I love this.
It's really cool, but it's also like it's so gross. So it's like I remember I was there, and my friend. This is when I went a couple years ago. So my friend Brady was traveling with me. And I'm like, dude, I gotta tell you what this says and what is happening here because it's one of the most disgusting things I'd ever seen. Yeah, really bad.
Please tell me you have pictures.
I do. I'll they're not like super good, but you can see the cup. Yeah, let me pull it up. It's really gross. Like a very cool way to show what this would have been like and how horrible this was. Because also, like, the thing to remember, like, the mosasaur quadrates are really important to them as animals in that it's both the ear bone, the main ear bone, and it attaches the jaw to the skull. And it was the bottom half of the bone that's hollowed out. So the entire jaw joint of this thing was pus. It's so gross.
Oh, Amelia, that's so gross.
Okay, so I was overestimating the amount of pus. It's only 0.5 liter of pus, but you can, again, I didn't take a picture of it because it was so disgusting. And actually the picture with the quadrate in front of it, those holes you're seeing, at least the bottom one, if I'm recalling correctly, are not actually breaks. Like this poor thing was literally hollowed out. So usually on a quadrate, there's this nice big, I'll send, if we want, I have like my actual pictures that I took when I was studying the thing. So you can actually see the backside of it that's hollowed out. It's so gross. And then as you can kind of see, in the jar, there's like this red jelly stuff on top that it's just a 0.5 liter of pus and blood. It's so gross. I could not believe it.
You know,
I was not happy about it.
I also feel like I can read this sign. Die Infektie heeft ruim 1.5 liter bot weefsel wegervretten. I don't know what the that should mean, but I do also on a much deeper level know what that means. I think half liter is not very subtle. I see what Dutch is doing there.
Mosasaurus quadratum.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Dit bot het quadratum.
I gotta look up one of those words, but that
Konsttekking das Overleafed. Wait, the Mosasaurus had. I don't know what Konsttekking should be, but is das Overleafed that ever lived? This is how it must be for Scott to read English.
No. That is the Mosasaurus. I think it's survived. I think it's saying that it lived through the injury.
Oh, I see. It overlived it. I see.
So to
random strays.
That wasn't a stray. That was targeted.
Hold on, I'm plugging it into Google Translated.
Well, yes, let's move on. And while we move on, I'm also going to just honorable mention to Suminia is another horrible looking animal. I hate seeing reconstructions of Suminia. It's like this arboreal.
Oh thing. Yeah. Oh yeah. Suminia is kind of just an uncanny valley looking critter. He looks like a nightmare demon. It's like genuinely if you crossed a lizard and a monkey.
Yeah, I think he's gross.
Yeah. Some reconstructions make it look more reasonable, but then some of them are yeah.
So our next question comes from Kyokyodoka, who asks, "Hello, Skeleton Crew. Here's a totally not complicated and or controversial question. How long does it take you guys to format, research, and finish a scientific paper? And in the case of Scott, how long does it take to fully prepare a fossil or series of fossils? Average time can be used, and also examples of how long it took could be used as well. I want to ask, so if I ever get in the field, I have a set time to aim for. Lamau." I would say to that, Lamau, there's not a set time to aim for.
Do not aim for a set time.
Don't aim for a set time. Everything takes longer than you think it will take.
Things take as long as they take.
It'll take as long as it takes.
Years.
Various factors impede that, but years is not uncommon. Yes.
In terms of fossil prep, I can say that like I've had projects that I've prepped out in like weeks. I've had or hours. I've had projects that's taken me like months. I think the longest I took on a single individual bone was like over 7 months. But I'm fully aware of prep projects that are so extensive and so complicated and so difficult to work on that they are just almost someone's life's work. Like they're insanely long projects.
Yeah, I mean, all papers take longer than you think. And I'll take this opportunity to say that one thing that I find a mild point of consternation is seeing tweets asking why papers aren't done yet. They're not done because they're not done. Mm-hmm. We're working on them. They're not new books that are coming out. They have to be right. They have to be science. It takes us a long time. It's not the new Star Wars movie. And thank God it isn't.
No one is more annoyed that the paper is not done than the person doing it. They don't.
Right.
They don't need you salivating over it like it's a trailer for some awful movie. Please stop doing it.
Right. It is just every time, as in the words of, or to paraphrase former U.S. President and potential future U.S. President Donald J. Trump, time until Pseudopody monograph just got 10 weeks longer. And yeah. Anyway, these things take a long time. I think it also depends on what you're doing on the paper. Like, my contribution to some papers has been like a day. Like the paper that Dalton and I were recently co-authors on was led by our friend of the channel, Kelsey Jenkins. My main contribution was CT scanning the specimen. Like that facilitated the study happening. I'm included as an author because of that. I know, Scott, but I'm saying that's roughly a day's work for me. That was like overall, that's what I did. I also read through the manuscript and I made edits where I felt appropriate, and you know what I mean. I did authorship things. I didn't just hand it off to her and say like that's it. But if you're leading a manuscript, it can take literally years. I have been working on Pseudopody since 2019. I'm working on it. It's, we're trying to make it good. Dueling Dinosaurs, same thing. There's a reason the paper's not out yet. It's because we're doing more science.
How long did Kuru take?
I was going to say Kuru is probably the shortest start to finish I've had as a lead. That and the Psittacosaurus amataba description. Kuru was started in January 2021. And I think submitted in May.
Yeah,
2021.
I think the shortest lead. I think the Eurypterid Telson paper. I think was 4 months total.
Yeah. I mean, the shortest they could be is on the order of months. They're not like blog posts. You know what I mean? They're not like a thing that you would just write in an afternoon and send out.
Right. And also, blogs are useless. Don't read them.
Well, I mean, to be mildly more kind, like a blog post can be interesting, but the burden of truth you have to clear to publish a blog post is just less. Like that's just the way it goes.
It's zero. You can write whatever you want.
You can actually just write it. So yeah, but yeah, I think in terms of what I've experienced, that lead time has been the shortest, but those have been for fairly straightforward anatomical descriptions that don't involve a tremendous reevaluation of other material. Like for Kuru, we could do it fast because we had a lot of dromaeosaurid material at AMNH or Yale, which meant me or Alex could look at it. And we had enough there that we could make a lot of the necessary comparisons. So there wasn't a lot of travel. And the dromaeosaurids were not like historically misinterpreted to a degree. Like there were some things where we said, actually, we think this character might be better scored this way. But it's not like we had to clean up some mess a prior author had made. Everything was generally done with pretty good science. And so I would say like 5 months there is kind of the minimum to, you see a specimen, you do all the comparisons, you write the paper, you do the analyses, you vet the analyses, you do everything, and you get it sent off. And have all the photography done and get all the figures prepared. More typical for me has been on the order of years, although some of them are now taking far longer than I would like. But again, I'm the one who's upset about that. You don't get to be. You get to be happy when I publish it. That's the way it goes.
And let's reiterate this. The ire here is not directed at you, Kyokyodoka.
No, yes, I'm sorry.
This is at folks in the online spaces who are like, man, I can't believe X paper hasn't come out yet. It's like, there's reasons why it hasn't. And it will come out when it's ready.
Yes, I think and to be clear, yes, Kyokyodoka, absolutely not a question. My consternation was not directed at you. I'm happy that you asked this question because I actually think it's an important thing that we can talk about that people often don't realize how long these research projects take. I don't like the implication that people are just being lazy and like, it's like, why don't they get off their ass and publish this? It's like, because again, that's actual science. We're not just taking pictures of the fossil and just being like, look, it has 12 vertebrae there. You know what I mean? We have to do with it.
Well, and the other like component of it that makes things sometimes take longer is the review process and also collaborating. Like sometimes you get a collaborator that's just really busy. And so it just takes weeks for them to get around to actually looking at it. Like sometimes you are that collaborator, like life happens. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Like I think with Yorgi, like it from Clint telling me about it and inviting me on to the paper being published was almost 2 years. Even though I wrote most of the description over 3 days, because I only had 3 days in North Dakota to sit with it. But like most of it was done, but like making the figures takes a long time. Waiting on your collaborators. Again, this is not like a point of I'm annoyed. It's just like people have lives and things happen. And they also tend to have other projects going on that sometimes are higher priority. So like, I'd say multiple years is not uncommon. Sometimes you can blitz a project and get it out. But even then you're at the mercy of your reviewers who also have lives and are not being paid to review your papers because the academic system is rotten. But anyways, like there's a lot of reasons that papers take forever. It's not just about writing the paper. Like there's because there's also like formatting references and like all these other little things that, if you're not actively going through it, it's easy to forget that like a lot of work goes into making a paper, even a short one. Even if the paper itself was written quickly, there's making the figures, getting it reviewed, formatting it for a journal, submitting it, waiting around. Like there's a lot of waiting that actually contributes to the amount of time that these things take.
And like I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, it's just like I was just saying, it all depends. Like Yorgi, I think actually would have even been longer if we had submitted to a different journal. Like the review was relatively quick because it was not internal, but because I used the AMNH's bulletin. Like I had a direct point of communication with the people involved in like mostly the formatting. So like formatting went really quickly relatively quickly because I knew exactly who to email to be like, hey, what do you want to see in this? And they would email me back. because again, we're at the same institution. So it went really quick. And also, just stuff like that. It just depends on the people involved and what's happening in their lives, but also like the journal you apply to and all this other fun stuff.
And sometimes you actually do all that work to get the paper submitted, and you might get rejected or you might get major revisions. And then by the time that happens, other things have happened and you don't have time to get to them.
Yep.
Like this has happened to me with the manuscript that I really do need to get resubmitted. But basically, I opened this year, I submitted a manuscript, then I worked really hard and got another manuscript submitted. And then I kind of had to pivot attention back to doing some travel and doing work associated with the Dueling Dinosaurs project. So then I kind of had to take the gas off on those. Then I got reviews back from one of them. I needed to submit to a different journal. But by that point, I found out I was getting a new job and I had to move. And then when I had to move, I had to start teaching. And then while that process was happening, I got reviews on the second paper that I submitted. And, and then all of this means what's the second paper I submitted, which Alex is a co-author on and we're very excited about, is getting resubmitted hopefully in a few weeks. And then the first paper I submitted has to become the next target. But now it'll be like nearly a year of kind of downtime before it gets resubmitted. And that's entirely because life has had a lot of those things go on. And this is, again, it's not like I'm just waking up and being like, what shall I do today? Different tasks have to take priority at different times.
Indeed. And I think what takes priority now is our last question for the month of June, which comes to us from Caiman, who asks, what's a paleontology fact that really grinds your gears or annoys you? And I struggled to think of how I wanted to answer this question. And I think I've come up with an answer that is somewhat satisfactory, but probably not within the spirit of what was asked. And so I'm sorry, but also not that sorry. Which is that there aren't any facts that grind my gears, but there are facts in quotes that grind my gears. They little sound bites that are commonly distributed out in the world that you'll see on I'm the science at everythingapp.com. That's clearly a bot, or you'll see it on social media. And the one that really comes to mind is did you know that a chicken is the closest living relative of a T-Rex? And it's there's so many abstractions away from the truth in that statement. No, a chicken is not the closest living relative of a T-Rex. All living birds are equally related to T-Rex. That's how phylogeny works. And you have taken the interesting fact that birds are dinosaurs and by trying to make it pithy and punchy and people will think this is interesting, have not only obfuscated the truth, but are now actively spreading misinformation in this fact, right? And it's so easy to make these little facts. And I find that almost any time that something is kind of this is why our videos are so long, right? It's not just because we're bloviating blowhards. It's a little bit that
we like the sound of our own voice.
Yeah, we love the sound of our own voice. That's probably 30% of it, but 70% of it is that presenting this information. It feels almost irresponsible to do it without the necessary context to understand it. And it's we say something, oh, this is this way. Why do we think it's that way? And also what else could it be? And what is the history and background that you need to know in order to appreciate, saying that a chicken is a dinosaur. It's an interesting fact in absence of any other information, but why? What does it mean? Is a chicken's a dinosaur? Is it the closest relative of T-Rex? No. Does it mean that a duck isn't a dinosaur? No. Right? There's so much extra information that goes along with it that I find these kind of little mini facts that get distributed, even when they're true, a little grating of it doesn't encourage engaging at a deeper level with the information or the field. That's my answer to what facts grind my gears.
Mine, I just thought of it while you were talking, because I was going to say that, kind of like you, that it isn't necessarily that there are facts that like grind my gears. But yeah, no, there is one that it's in a similar vein. It's when people talk about that, a refrain that I've heard many times of the skeletons that you see in museums aren't real. They're fake, with an implication that it's a lie. That pisses me off. Like, it's like they're not fake. I don't like using the word fake to refer to casts, because it's like, it's not fake. I could hit you over the head with it. Does it feel fake? Come on. It's like these are very rigorously created replicas, or very rigorously sculpted models. And honestly, I think that a lot of museums are doing a disservice by not highlighting the really cool and really interesting work that goes into filling out a skeleton from like relatively fragmentary remains. Like, I know that this is definitely like a selection bias for these are stories that I have, or conversations I've had with people that I've given tours of the AMNH to, which means that they're already my friends. And I already think that they're all right, and they think that what I do is interesting. But every time we've walked up and looked at the Patagotitan skeleton, and I've gone, did you know that we only have like roughly 16% of the skeleton of this individual? And they've been like, what do you mean? You have the whole thing there. And then we go into a conversation about, is like, there were multiple individuals found, scaling up or scaling down of different elements. Animals are bilaterally symmetrical. If you have the right arm, you know what the left arm looks like. Related animals, you can kind of fill in these gaps, sort of things. And like, it becomes like a demonstration of the science that goes into how do we know what this animal looked like, and not just this pithy, quick, and wrong thing of scientists are lying to you and they made this stuff up.
Yeah, Scott, you should come to the new Peabody, because there's an exhibit on fakes and what it means for something to be real or fake.
Oh my god!
Replica, and like what kinds of like replicas are made, who makes them, for what purpose, like what.
It's the Marilyn Fox exhibit. Fantastic! Let's go.
It's a really cool little like corner of the museum.
Oh my god! Okay, that'll be the only time I've ever seen an exhibit like that. That's really, really neat.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is in that vein of, it's not really a factoid, but just the kind of idea that I've seen, especially in newer museums, that paleontology and dinosaurs are for kids, and then the entire exhibits get modeled around that. And again, it's not like it's a fact, but it's an attitude that's really frustrating. And like, it's frustrating because it leads to like exactly that. Like, it leads, on top of the signage and stuff saying that fossils are fake, like it just plays into that it's not something to be taken seriously. There's not actually real science going on. I'm tired, so I'm not making a lot of sense, but I hope I'm making some sense. But it's just like this, all of these things together. It makes talking to the public about what we do hard, and it makes convincing funding agencies that the work you do is actual important science hard, because there's this fact that, you know, paleo is made up and for kids. And it really, really bugs me when museums lean into that. Like, I do not think that I don't think that museums need to be tailored towards kids at all. I think they should be tailored somewhere in the middle, you know, because that's the point. The ambitious kids are going to want to learn more, and they'll figure it out on their own anyway. But also, you're not boring your adult audience, and you're actually taking the work and the science seriously, which, you know, in today's day and age, people taking science seriously is unfortunately a problem, or them not taking it seriously.
I will say I agree with everybody here. I think without speaking too precisely, there are a tremendous number of things that are assumed operationally within our field that are not correct. I'm currently putting final touches on a manuscript that's dealing with a lot of them. And so, you know, and members of the skeleton crew will be talking about all of these things in greater detail. It bothers me that they are things that have kind of become entrenched, and there is a very real possibility in any field where people don't kind of do the continual work to check things that have been done prior, that there will be errors that compound. And it bothers me that so many of them still exist. Many common little factoids that we hear a lot are based on research that reevaluation may have even already shown to not pass muster, but are still repeated. Like, I think we dealt with this a little bit in the Allosaurus video with hatchet biting and all of that. Like, that's a thing that's very friendly to like a TikToker's was this dinosaur built like a hatchet? And and it's just, I don't know, it gets disseminated, and then there's, if you're a young person, you grow up thinking it and it becomes part of your operational assumptions. I had to undo a lot of them when I started my PhD because I was a kid who liked dinosaurs and stayed up to date with paleo news. And as soon as I was really in the field, I was like, oh my God, wait. It's a difficult thing. And not everybody gets that experience.
All my thoughts have been shared. Thank you. You've reached the end of the video.
Yes. You have, in fact, yes, reached the end of the video.
Yes. And at the end of the video, because this video is for patrons, but also for everybody else, I want to thank our patrons, because our patrons do an amazing thing, which is they allow us to keep doing the Skeleton Crew. And so we thank them all very much. So as of right now, our patrons at Gorgosaurus tier and higher, who get a verbal shout out at the end of all of our videos, in addition to their names in the credits with all of our other patrons, include Benjamin Seepser, Nickname, Philip Fico, Christopher Bellis Jones, Aaron Anderson, Adamolos, Aaron Anderson, Adamolos, Black Spectral Pig, Blacklight Virus, Amphibia, Chaotic Kaiju, Danocheirus, Dinodom, Kevin Preem, King Zasshu, Life Finds a Way, Max Ironpaw, Pythonic, RyanWantsToDie, Swamp Ape Science, Wanderer, and Wheat. So thank you all so much for your support of the Skeleton Crew. As I've said, we could not do this without you. And we thank you very, very much, because we know that supporting us is a completely voluntary thing on your end. You certainly don't need to do it. We're happy that you make the choice to do so anyway. So thank you all very much. And we will see you in our next Skeleton Crew Q&A video.
Woo!
Bye-bye.